All good.
All right.
Yeah.
Here
What
we
are we
are.
talking about again here?
Foils
For waves.
For waves versus swell.
Ooh, no wonder we're sitting down.
That's right. It's going to be a real doozy. Right on him. Jeff here.
Things I
MACkite.
care about for 2000. Alex.
You know who I am.
Let's get started. We know who he is. And of course, everybody knows the legend,
Don't say
the
that.
man, the myth himself, who started the whole video revolution when it comes to wing dangers.
Don't put
Tuck
that on there,
Daddy.
Jeff. I don't want that. I
You don't want that? All right, take two. It's Jeff at MACkite.
Ryan and MACkite.
And Tucker, and today we're here to talk to you about different foils for different kinds of waves, different strokes for different folks, kids.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk through some of those choices, how you might choose the right foil for the day or for your quiver or for your conditions or however you want to ride at your level. We're going to get into that a little bit, just kind of talk through some of the concepts here, and probably won't hear a clear answer from any of us on this is what you should buy, but these are some of the concepts we think you should be thinking about when you're looking at your next foil for riding onto waves, brada.
Right on.
Cool.
It's kind of like part of the progression. So we're talking to the audience that already has learned the sport a bit.
Yeah.
And obviously would like to get into some wave riding. And I think we're gonna break it down in two types of waves: a swell, a moving swell, versus a wave that breaks and has power.
Yeah, so a rolling versus a breaking wave. Rolling waves typically found in deeper water. They're there just crawling along.
It's like-
Same
it's like
kind of shape the whole way.
Like a ball rolling down a nice smooth, just
Yeah.
keeps rolling. Whereas I like your
Breaking waves.
analogy where you put a rope on a ball and you throw the ball and it wham.
Yeah, it's got some whip to it
Whip to it.
because when a wave comes and gets shallower, it folds on itself. It stands up and folds on itself. That power builds up and moves that way. So the wave is more powerful, more aggressive, steeper in those breaking waves. So that changes the kind of foils you want to ride, the way you approach riding that wave. And on a day, typically where you're going to go out and downwind for 10 miles and open swell versus ride critical breaking swell in one location. Typically that's going to change how you're thinking about the foil you're choosing for that day.
And we think this is a good discussion point, because if you've got a foil and you're looking to upgrade to a smaller foil, you have some options here. What aspect ratio? And I think what we're trying to frame this conversation is a little bit more around what kind of riding do you plan on doing?
Yep.
And if you have an area where you're blessed to ride waves that are pitchy and powerful and break, and what foil do we find that we feel performs well in that kind of a type of powerful wave versus rolling swell? So that's kind of the context to help you as you're thinking about branching out and having two different foils. We all would agree that there's two different foils to kind of meet those areas. You can find ones that would do both quite well, and maybe we'll have some open discussion about that.
Yeah, and it's a sliding scale, right? I mean,
Yeah.
there's no this and that. It's a bit of apples and apples, more so than apples and oranges.
So Ryan, why
And
don't you get us
there's
started here a
places
little bit?
in between.
What would you pick when you think of your quiver and what you get to ride for a more of a powered up wave versus rolling wave? What do you like?
So I'll start with powered up wave because we're in fall here, and that's kind of our conditions are moving that direction. During summer, it's a lot more downwind swell. During fall, stuff tends to stand up, get a little more powerful.
Yeah, a bit more
Get those
onshore. Yeah.
Bigger days.
A
So
little pitchy.
that bigger pitchy wave. Yep. I like to go with something that's a little bit, I don't know, I would say kind of like medium high aspect. Looking for something around that 7-8 aspect ratio range. It's not super wide, so you can really turn it tight, carve it tight, stay in the pocket a little bit more. But yet it's got a high enough aspect ratio where you still get some good glide out of it. Still really pumpable. You can pump between sections, that sort of thing. And then moving on to the downwind swell, kind of the other side of that. Efficiency is the name of the game there. You want something that's really efficient. Generally don't find myself doing a whole lot of tight carving in that situation. It's more chasing the swell downwind, kind of some loose carves back and forth, mellow riding. And there I usually bump up the aspect ratio a little bit. I would say closer to 10, give or take a little bit there. 10 usually seems to be a pretty good sweet spot where you got a lot of glide and efficiency. You can really chase that swell downwind well. The problem with going with too low of an aspect ratio, I find, is you just don't have the speed to keep up with it. You end up falling back behind the swell, which is never fun.
Yeah, it's not necessarily the aspect ratio that's causing that, but more so the efficiency of the foil, right? So the higher aspect you get, the wider the speed range, the better the glide ratio typically. So a lot of times when you're riding a higher aspect ratio foil, you can size down. So you are faster, but you're also slower in a way for the same size.
It's a perfect lead in to pick a brand that you have in your car that you've been riding the most. Pick one that fit each of those.
Yeah, lately over the last month here, I've been spending some time on the Axis stuff. So for that downwind swell, I'm riding the Art V2s right now. For that pitchier wave.
What size?
Spitfires.
What size are you doing that?
Yeah, I'm generally, depending on how I'm riding, if I'm on a more kind of prone riding, I usually bump up a little bit. If I'm on a wing, I'll bump down a little bit. So somewhere around the 900,000 square centimeter range.
Yeah, that's a whole nother, aspect of this. A whole other dimension is the size you're choosing for the day. But
that's why I kind of want to know what your focus was.
Yeah, back to the basics on this a little bit for those people that might not be super familiar with some of these concepts and reasons why. So maybe we should bring it into the basics, I guess. Aspect ratio is the difference of the total size of the wing and the span of the wing. So a low aspect foil is very chunky, short wingspan, thicker cord, almost like a triangle like this. Higher aspect foils have a wider wingspan, shallower cord as their total surface area. So you get something that's, more like this, more long wing shaped, almost like a long oblong, I don't know what you want to call it, like a pen shape almost, or an airplane wing.
It's like a foot long sub, real long.
Yeah,
there.
Great. Yeah, so that's the differences between the two aspect ratios. Lower aspect foils have more agile roll because they have a narrower span for the same size. So, when you say you want something that turns better in braking waves, it's really the roll we're talking about. It's how quick it can roll into that turn because you're at higher speeds, steeper faces, more critical areas you're trying to fit into it. So you need to really roll into that turn. Whereas downwinding, it's more directional. You're soaring, so to speak. You're not carving, you're soaring more. And you might make hard carving turns, but they're not in those super critical steep sections of a wave where you have to make that turn in that. You can kind of make it how you need to. You're not trying to fit it in. You're not trying to deal with the massive power of a wave while you're ripping that turn. It's pretty consistent. It's level, fairly low power by comparison to a braking wave of a similar size. So that's where it makes sense to go a little lower aspect for braking waves in my experience. Whereas the flip side, rolling waves, you're not dealing with a ton of power. You're not dealing with a ton of areas where you can carve into and really amp up that speed that's going to give you that pow, jet, go. So you need the efficiency of high aspects, ideally, to help build that speed, compound that speed, and continue your glide through the flatter sections. Or when you're making those turns, you're not getting that immediate acceleration to get out of it because that power source is limited, right? And it's not that steep. Mm-hmm. If you're a skier or snowboarder, it's like you're riding the bunny hill all day versus your black diamond steep hill. You don't have a problem with speed. You got to control that speed. Bunny hill, you need to create enough speed to do a proper turn. So that's a different kind of a problem. Sure. So in terms of the aspect ratios, that's where we can look at for those. The downside, again, of a low aspect foil is there's a limited range. It's not as efficient. The glide, it's going to decelerate quicker. It's going to stall easier. Higher aspect foils are going to glide further, carry their speed more efficiently in the glide, and generally for the same size, all things being similar, are going to have a lower stall speed. Because the higher aspect you go, the bigger the range.
What do you ride now? So give some context. Sizes. What are the two different ones you'd pick? and your quiver you've been riding lately?
Yeah, I mean, like Ryan says, it depends on the day. You know, if it's a 2-foot breaking day or a 10-foot breaking wave, those are two very different foils, and it might even change the aspect ratio I'm riding.
What do you got in your car right now? What have you been riding?
I got a lot of everything
Wait,
in
no,
my
but
car.
what have you
I
been
got a lot
riding?
of code. I got a lot
What
of
are you
AFS.
gonna pick on a pitchy day here in our lake?
Yeah, a pitchy day, typical day, head high, breaking waves. I'm gonna be on something like 850S code, skate 850, skate 750, something like that.
Mhm.
Something efficient, fast, really surfy, carvable. On the flip side of that, downwinding, I'm going to be on something higher aspect than that. So F1 Eagle, Eagle X, Code R series, or just a slightly larger S series to deal with that lower power, waist, chest high, rolling, mellow swell. I want to be able to still rip those, but you don't need that critical in the pocket turning. Typically, I'm going to size up a little bigger for those rolling swell days because they don't pack as much punch. I don't want to constantly be stalling or flirting with stalling when I'm making my turns, when I'm pumping. I want to be square in the middle or even slightly upper middle of the range. In breaking waves, it's about the opposite. You have plenty of power there. Generally, you're going to size up your wing to match that power and be able to ride a smaller foil to control in those situations where it's critical. Having too big of a wing and you're trying to make those turns in breaking waves, it's not going to work. But you can kind of handicap yourself by going with smaller foil, bigger wing. That way you have the power to drag you out of any situation you might need, but also have the control to handle those higher power breaking waves. So
Yeah, I find myself if the waves are moving fast, like roll and swell, I want to be on that 9-10 aspect, something like the Eagle. Below 1,000, I've been finding that a lot of foils. I don't know if it's to be true, and we get to ride a lot of different brands. That when you start to think under 1,000, a lot of people think that's too small.
yeah,
But surprisingly, they have a lot of lift for their size. I actually can feel like you can ride a smaller foil on that swell as long as you have it in that right aspect ratio. Like Ryan, you were saying that 8, 9, 10, more than that 9, 10 range. You just get that efficiency and that speed. And generally speaking, too, in our area, when we get that rolling swell, there's wind. Because that's what's creating our swell. So it can be dependent on where you live. But yeah, so the Eagle is one of my favorite to ride in that. Usually right around 890 Eagle. I've ridden the X too. I need a little more time in that to kind of feel where that would be, where would I'd use that, in that same type of, swell, like what different swell that would be more beneficial. Maybe a faster moving swell, and I'm doing a downwinder and I want maximum glide and pumpability. I might go in that more higher 10 and above. Potentially.
Yeah, especially if you're sizing down a lot too.
Yes,
because
in the smaller size.
The higher aspect you go, the smaller you can go in the same wind, assuming you know what you're doing.
Yep. And then in a surfy, when I want to do more of a surfy, like something around 750 or 850 skate in that 8 range. I've also been on the Spitfire. I like that in the wave, and then the North SF in that 830 range.
Yeah.
Just to give some examples of things that we sell that I like to ride in that style of more pitchy, powerful wave.
The reality is a lot of people aren't going to invest in 2 different foils for those 2 different riding situations. We're in a unique situation. We have lots of demos we can grab from.
Sure.
So we have that opportunity, but it's always in the back of my mind when I'm grabbing that stuff and going riding, like, hey, if I had to pick one foil, one style of foil and maybe 2 or 3 sizes, what would it be? If I had to only pick one foil, one size, what it would be? Those are things I try to digest as we're testing gear. There are some that kind of toe the line, right? Like I mentioned, I'm riding the AFS Enduros, and I have those in my truck right now. They're amazing across both ranges in the proper size. Code S series, same thing. Really great.
Agree.
Across breaking and downwind swell, rolling swell. Of course, it's also very dependent on ability. If you can't make those turns that are that critical, that are that tight, that are that hardcore, there's no reason you need to have that foil. You can have a foil that'll downwind a little better, and if you're not making those ripping, rolling,
Potentially pump
in
better,
the pocket
more
turns,
efficient and pumping.
yeah, it's going to glide better. It's going to pump better if you
Yeah.
get outside and you're just riding rolling swell on some day, because it's better for that, or you just don't feel like riding the breaking swell on the inside. It's going to do that well. And a lot of the foils we talked about do cross over quite well. We're just talking about the nitpicky little things here.
I think we've gotten, obviously we've gone a little deep for some that can pick up what we're talking about, but also from a general standpoint, you want to start riding waves, start riding swell. We are looking at foils that are higher in the aspect ratio, 8, 7, 8. Yes, you can still do that. I like your analogy of the triangle, the lower aspect.
Yeah.
They're going to be rolly and turny, but they're going to be a lot of drag if you're below that 6 aspect or 5 aspect.
Real limited speed
Real
range.
limited. So we're, to really maximize the experience that we get riding that wave and the glide, and there's no brakes underneath there, and you're feeling that power and moving along with that speed. Generally speaking, we're talking about a little bit mid or higher aspect foils, so 7.8s, 8s, and 9s.
Yeah, that's a fairly recent development. Years ago, the surf foils were low aspect and this thick, and they gave you that lifty feeling and lots of upward lift, but they didn't create much glide. They didn't compound speed very well. So as we've leveled up over the years in how we ride the waves and what we're looking for from the waves and ranging across different conditions, we found, yes, those slightly higher aspect foils, those slightly thinner, faster, more efficient foils really help you compound that speed and continue that, throughout the conditions if they should change or just different days or whatever. But
it's made it easier too, I think.
Yeah,
to
I
ride
think
waves.
so.
I mean, you don't have to read waves as well. Your foil's going to, if you get it in the right position, it's going to start moving right along.
Yeah, the good ones, the stance is more neutral.
Yeah.
It's not so front foot heavy. You're not just leaning on your front foot trying to hold the nose down all the time, which is kind of what you get from those thicker, lower aspect foils, especially on a breaking wave. But then they also require more technique to turn. So that's kind of the flip side of all of this. We're talking about all these higher end foils. They do require a higher end skill.
A little bit better
so
pilot.
as a brand new rider,
Yeah.
don't just jump on one of these super high aspect thin foils and tiny size. Then you can go out there and rip, because they require a bit more nursing through the turn. They don't have as much catch, as much lift through the turn. So you're creating that arc. You're not just going along for the ride. You don't just roll it over and go for the ride. You're pushing into it. And that's kind of what brings us into sort of the next topic in the same situation is stabilizers and fuselages make a huge difference in waves. So we're talking about carving, turning performance. It's not just about the glide. It's not just about staying on foil anymore. Now you're asking this foil to do a lot more for you. And that's sometimes a conflict, right? Like the real good downwind stuff is very flat and efficient, but it's sometimes squirrely or unpredictable in turns. Doesn't really have that magic feeling. Some of the surfier stuff from the prone side of things is just a little draggy and not as fun that way. So finding that balance in the middle, especially if you're thinking about doing both the swell and the breaking waves, can be the trick.
Yeah, I've found some success if you want to keep it simple. From my riding, ability, I can ride the really smaller ones, higher aspect, higher mid aspect, but I'm really happy right around 900 to 1,000 on a 8 aspect foil, and I can bridge the gap with a rolling swell and pitchy wave. I know Brian, you and I have had multiple conversations with that. If we just want one foil to dip our feet and get kind of riding both,
that's a good choice. Yeah, it does a lot of everything.
Around, and we, right around, if you're a rider like around 170 to 200 pounds, right around that 1,000, give or take, a little less, depending on your skill set, speed.
Depending on the particular foil and exactly.
I think you nailed it too, Tucker. When you start getting, down to the really small, higher aspect, it does take a little bit more piloting. It's a different feel, different, the sensitivity of it, and driving it, and getting what you can out of that does take some practice. So
yeah,
I don't think we're advocating to, drive small as possible, have fun on a pitchy wave. You can still
you want to be in
that.
the middle of the range usually. It's kind of where you, especially if you're making turns, because if you're already at the bottom of the range and you make a critical turn, now you stall.
Yeah.
There's nowhere to go. You want to stay in the middle of the range. If you have the ability to ride and compound the speed and hold that range, even on a smaller day, great, go smaller. If you don't, go a little bigger. It's okay.
And it can
Probably not making the turns that require that anyway.
Yeah.
So pick the proper size. With regard to fuselage length, I think we can probably all agree braking waves a little shorter can be helpful, especially if it's really critical. You need to fit in a tight turn. It's going to allow those tighter, twitchier turns.
And your style of riding in that, if you want to actually surf it, go top to bottom and do a lot more
Yeah,
turning.
yeah, it depends on what you're trying to
versus
do with
just
it. But as a
sliding
general
up.
rule, braking waves, you're going to use a little narrower span on your stabilizer, a more surfy stabilizer, more shape in the stabilizer to give you some traction in the turn, something to push off of. The more open water gliding you're doing, the wider, higher aspect, flatter stabs are slightly more efficient. If you're looking to make hard carving turns, I would argue those are still maybe a little flat, maybe a little lifeless, maybe a little
You can drive them
sketchy. You know, if you really lay into, you know, a hard turn with a real flat, high aspect stab, it'll have a tendency to slide, which can be, you know, holding you back a little bit. If you're worried about that, you're not putting everything into, you know, the turn that you can. And then also on that same token, you know, a little longer fuse when you're riding those rolling swells can definitely help keep that board flying efficiently and improve your glide, improve your pumpability. And then those turns, you know, you're doing a lot of yaw oriented turns, so it's really not holding you back. And when you are laying into a turn, it's generally a more powerful open turn rather than a snappy, quick, tight rolling turn. So in the rolling swell, I find little higher aspect, little longer fuse is kind of where I go with that.
And you can mix and match too. If
Of
you're
course.
on an open rolling swell and you're out on a day where you want to turn a little tighter, carve a little tighter, you can put a little shorter fuse on there. That helps.
Yeah.
You can play with the stabilizer a little bit.
Yeah, stabilizer shape's a big one for me.
Yep.
Even on the downwind models, I like to make turns, so I still like a little shape, a little bit of anhedral or a little flare, rather than just a flat stab.
Straight, speedy.
Yep, that's my personal
I agree.
opinion. Even on the real high aspect stuff, I like a surfier stab, and I don't really mind, you know, that loss of minuscule micro glide, maybe a 2-inch improvement or something like that in your total glide. Doesn't really make a big difference, but how the turn feels is huge.
Yeah, I'd say fuselage has been least of my focus because the front foils have gotten so good at what they do that something right in the middle is where I find myself. If a brand offers 3, I like kind of the middle length. If they don't, I usually go longer versus shorter, just because of the front foils have gotten such that you can still surf and pivot and turn.
Yeah.
It gives you a little bit more stability pitch wise, a little more confidence, you know, from my standpoint. So I have not focused as much, you know. I think as technology has improved with the front foils, the fuselage does aid in its surfability versus its stability. But I think it's less of a
And nowadays
importance.
it's fairly standardized. Everybody
Yes.
is still within the same grouping.
They usually have a couple.
So if you're in the
couple
medium group, it's all pretty similar even across brands.
Yeah.
And I'm just talking about small changes. I'm not talking about going 900 versus 300, you know, millimeters. That's completely outside of the norm.
Yeah.
I'm talking about small shifts,
Yeah.
you know, from 650 to 700, from, you know, 650 to 620. Those smaller changes can make those little differences that can help take your riding to the next level in those certain conditions. But yeah, for most people, you're going to go medium,
650
maybe
to
even a little
700.
longer.
Six in the 600 to 700.
Yeah, they're all measured differently, so it's really
Yeah.
hard to compare across brands.
Yeah. But I'm finding a lot of them are in that range.
Yeah, in general, longer
General
fuse,
terms.
smaller stab, I think is where a lot of people are going, even more experienced riders, because you gain notable efficiency out of a smaller stab. Going a little longer on the fuse maintains that glide stability, that low end range. If you go real tiny stab, real tiny fuse, it's just going to be kind of a nightmare to ride.
Yeah.
It's really twitchy and maneuverable, but it's going to take a lot more effort to ride.
Side note on the fuses, where that mast is mounted in relation to the front wing
That's a big one as
complain
well.
about a little bit too.
Mhm.
Yeah, you don't usually get a choice of that within a specific brand, other than
Right.
maybe Axis. But
But
yeah, where it's positioned.
700 versus 600 could be the same fuse essentially between brands.
Yeah, and
Just
it's going to
because of
change
where
what
the
size
mount-
stab you're riding as well. Based on where your stance is compared to where the mass mounts to the front wing, essentially. So the closer those two are, the center of the front wing to the mast, the more surfy and loose it's going to feel. The further apart they are, the more upwind drive and stability you're going to get.
Getting
So-
deep now.
It's
Yeah,
hard to
yeah, we're
compare-
really taking a dive.
We really dove
Well,
into the foil.
Here's my point with that: is it's hard. Sometimes it's hard to compare between brands from one brand to another because
is.
of those differences.
Yeah.
But you can compare within the same brand. So most people are going to get one foil system. They're going to stick with it.
Yep.
Maybe they jump ship to a different foil later on. But you got your one foil system. And when we're talking sizing here, long, medium, short, we're talking sizing within your brand.
Yeah, relative
talking
to
compare
what's normal in the
over
brand.
here,
Yeah.
brand
Good
over
point.
here, and they're small
Yep.
with their.
Yeah, don't go down that rabbit hole because a 650 over here might be relative to an 850 over here, but it's called a 650 because they all measure them differently. So don't trust the metrics from the brands on that. You really, need to talk to somebody that's ridden them and how it's related in that specific line in their foils and how they ride. It's
But taking this
quite
back
different.
taking this back a little bit for those that are listening that haven't been riding waves, but are really efficient at maybe riding both directions real well, can do all your jives, maybe started doing some tacks, maybe riding some small little waves on whatever foil you're on, maybe it's your 13, 1400, and you're starting to get like excited about riding waves. Don't be frightened by going down around that 1,000, these sizes that we're talking about. Because I know I do talk to customers like, oh, I'm not ready for that. I got a 1400, maybe I should just go to a 1200. Yeah, it could be, it depends on what kind of waves you're trying to ride, but these, you can make the next step.
Yeah, almost anybody, if you're confident riding in average winds, you can ride a 1,000 foil in good wind.
You'd be surprised.
Once you hit 20 knots, you can ride everything.
Yes, agree with that.
It might take you a minute to adjust, but there's plenty of power in the wind. There's plenty of
Don't be frightened by it.
Of room there to get up and go, and you'll be shocked at how intuitive they are to ride. Big foils are hard to ride.
They are.
I mean, they're a lot harder to ride than a smaller, well-built foil.
And we've had some local guys I've talked to this very conversation. They're like around a 14, 1500. And I've seen them. They're good riders. They can ride and stay up 30 minutes without falling in. They're starting to do all their stuff. And they're like, well, I'm going to start riding waves. And I try to talk them into going around 1,000 or 900. Oh, that's way too small. I couldn't do that.
Yeah.
No, you can. Give it enough wind. Initially will really help power up. You will be able to have success riding.
Yeah, and it opens up a lot of world for you. Now
Yes.
you can glide between waves. You can get out of bad sections of waves through your efficiency. You're not going to stall as easily.
Yeah.
You're not getting stuck in bad situations where the lip's coming down on you because you can just put the pedal to the metal and now you're over here because you're so fast. So it really, opens up the world, and it's always great to see the look on somebody's face the first time they jump on a good foil like that, because it's like, man, I got all this like momentum, and then like I kicked out and it kept going.
Yeah.
Like whereas
And I
normally
didn't
it's
have to
like
do
I
much.
kicked out and I got to hurry and quick grab my wing because I'm gonna drop.
Yeah.
And like no, it just
the brakes aren't on. It's still going.
like dang, this
Yeah.
albatross keeps rolling.
Yeah. No, I think we hit it pretty good. Is there any last comments we want to make, or?
Yeah, I think we chased the rabbit down the hole pretty
did a
good
little
here.
bit.
So hopefully you guys stay with us, enjoy that.
Yeah.
But if you have more specific questions for us, give us a ring at the shop. We can talk you through how it relates to your personal situation, what you're riding now, your individual conditions and what you're riding and how that all works together. So be happy to do that. So give us a shot.